Hello, welcome everyone. We're going to get started. Good evening and welcome to our Literary Cafe. My name is Helen Liu and I'm the Programming and Partnerships Manager at Cary Library. I want to take a moment to thank the Cary Library Foundation. Their support enables us to bring programs like tonight's event to you. The Literary Cafe is created by the foundation and we are pleased to collaborate with Marjan Kamali on this series. This program is being recorded and posted to the library's YouTube channel. If you have any questions, if you're here in person with us, please raise your hand. And if you're with us on Zoom, please submit your questions to the Q&A. And we will answer them at the end of the program. Books by our authors are available for purchase at the table in the back. Our authors will also be happy to sign your books after the program. Now I'd like to introduce our host. Marjan Kamali is the author of the national bestseller, The Stationery Shop, which is being adapted into an HBO series, and Together Tea, which was Massachusetts Book Award finalist. Her novels have been translated in over 20 languages. Born in Turkey to Iranian parents, Kamali spent her childhood in Turkey, Iran, Germany, Kenya, and the US. She's a 2022 recipient of the National Endowment of the Arts Creative Writing Fellowship. She holds a bachelor's degree in English literature from the University of California, Berkeley, an MBA from Columbia University, and a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing from New York University. She currently teaches creative writing at Grub Street and lives in the Boston area with her family. Please join me in welcoming Marjan, who's going to introduce our guest this evening.
Thank you so much, Helen. Thank you, those of you who are here in person. It's lovely to see you. Thank you for coming. We have a nice contingency of folks on Zoom. So welcome to our Zoom folks as well. I'm super excited to be here with Rachel, who is a dynamo and an incredibly talented writer. Tonight, we're going to talk about Rachel's second novel, which is Atomic Anna. And I'm gonna tell you a little bit about Atomic Anna, and then a little bit about Rachel, and then Rachel's gonna do a brief presentation, and then she and I are gonna be in conversation. As always with the Literary Cafe, you don't need to have read the book to enjoy our discussion, because we discuss a whole set of issues. But I'm pretty sure by the end of our chat, you'll be really wanting to read Atomic Anna. So Atomic Anna is about 3 generations of women who work together and travel through time to prevent the Chernobyl disaster and to right the wrongs of the past in their family. It's received so much well-deserved praise. The New York Times Book Review has said one of the many wonderful things about Atomic Anna, a book about Chernobyl, yes, but also about comic books, the power of math, finding one's truth, and love, both biological and found, is the core group of women who ground it. The novel is masterfully plotted. The LA Review of Books called it propulsive and intimate. And in a starred Kirkus review, they said the book is an incredible achievement, as ambitious as a Greek tragedy and just as lyrical and unflinching. And Publishers Weekly says Barenbaum burnishes her reputation as an up-and-coming talent with this audacious time travel story. Barenbaum dares greatly and succeeds. And succeeds she does. So let me just tell you a little bit about Rachel before she takes over the mic. Rachel is a prolific writer and reviewer whose work has appeared in publications such as the LA Review of Books, Harper's Bazaar, Hey Alma, and more. She's currently a scholar in residence at the Hadassah Brandeis Institute at Brandeis University, and she's a graduate of Grub Street's novel incubator. She's also the founder of Debut Spotlight and the debut editor at A Mighty Blaze, where she supports a ton of authors and interviews them. And in a former life, she was a hedge fund manager and a spin instructor. She has degrees from Harvard in business and literature and philosophy. She lives in Brookline, Massachusetts, and is an elected town meeting member And her first novel, A Bed in the Stars, got all sorts of accolades and was a Boston Globe bestseller. So welcome, Rachel.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello. It's working? Okay. So Marjan, I'm so excited to be here with you and so excited to be here tonight. Thank you so much for having me and for everyone who's doing everything to make this happen. I'm a huge fan of Marjan, so it's amazing to be up here. I actually ran after her at the Boston Book Fest a few years ago to ask her to sign. I don't know if you remember, and sat down with her for lunch. And I was like, hi.
I
Would you
do.
sign my
I
book?
remember a lovely fan. No, of course I remember, yes.
That was me. It's like, I love you. Can I eat with you and will you sign my book? So it's totally an honor to be here with her and to be here with you guys tonight. So I'm just going to stand up because I'm going to take you through a couple of slides, and I'm sort of assuming that, are you sure this is working?
Yeah.
Okay, I just have not, it's like in a funny angle. So Atomic Anna, assuming that none of you guys have read it yet, which is great, but so it's the story, like Marjan said, of 3 generations of women. So it's grandmother, mother, and daughter who work together to build a time machine that they use to stop Chernobyl. But do not be confused by the time machine element. It's not sci-fi. It is really literary fiction in sort of the feel of Time Traveler's Wife or Outlander, right? The time travel is a vehicle by which we talk about parenthood, motherhood, family, right? And time travel is really about regret. Whenever you talk about going back, it's to fix something, right? You never go back because, you know, Bernie, you missed something. You want to fix it. You want to bring it back. And so that's why I talk a lot about time travel. So it is set in the Soviet Union to America. My characters are refuseniks, so they are Jews who are not allowed to leave, who then find a way to escape, and they come to America. So why Chernobyl? Why am I obsessed with this? My first book, Bed in the Stars, was set in 1914 Russia. So my family came over from Russia, and I grew up with these great aunts who came to my house every Friday night for dinner because my grandmother passed away when I was very, very young. So her sister sort of took care of all of us, cousins and everyone. And they would come over every Friday night and they would call me and they'd be like, Rachel, you know, and I was the oldest. So I'd go over and I loved them very much. I really did. But I was a little scared because they smelled like Manischewitz and herring, right? And so they bring me over and they're like, Rachel, do you know where the passports are? Do you know where the emergency money is? I would say yes, because that was my job. And they would say good, because we ran and we might have to run again. So I sort of grew up with that shadow over me. Always have the passport, always have the emergency money. So my books are about running, right? Running for safety. This idea that maybe wherever we are is not permanent. But how do I get to Chernobyl? So these same 2 great aunts are sitting with me watching the news the night that we hear about Chernobyl here in America. And, you know, this is back when we had to show up at 6 o'clock, right? And I had to fix the antenna. And I was in Philadelphia, like turned to channel 6. They would only watch channel 6 news, right? And I'm going up there and then the news comes on and they say there was a terrible accident. Right, that happened, and I started hearing about what happened in the Soviet Union, and I was a little girl, but until that point, I thought an accident was you hurt your knee, right? My brother falls, whatever. I smack him, but for this, it was the first time I saw a grown-up accident, and I was just terrified that it could be this bad, and sort of changed my worldview. It was this moment, and then the one aunt leans over to the other, and she goes, if there was a woman in charge, that wouldn't have happened. And I have these women in my head, right? They're like forever in my head. I still think about them. So we fast forward to 2016, and this is one of the big anniversary years for Chernobyl. And I'm still sort of have them in the back, and I start remembering watching the news with them and coming up with, sort of these ideas. And I see this picture. So when Chernobyl was built, it was sort of supposed to be this model city, right? This beautiful place for everyone to live. And all these young families were there. There were really no older people because it was literally a new city, right? They took all young people to work in Pripyat, which is right near Chernobyl. And they would bus people out. So the Soviet Union has like hours and hours of black and white footage and color footage that you can watch of people living this idyllic life in Pripyat. And so you can see this pool in all its splendor in some of those pieces. But then I saw this picture and I was like, this is a haunted pool, right? This is Pripyat. This is what it is now.
I just thought, I have to write about this and how I get to time. So I don't know if any of you are swimmers, but in the back, you see the swimming clock, right? If you're a swimmer, that clock is everything, right? Everyone, right? Swimmers leave on the 10, right? Or every 10, or right, whatever it is, right? That clock is everything, and it is stopped. But time stopped, and no one is talking about Chernobyl. And this is what got me thinking, inspired me into the story. And time is something I've been obsessed with for many, many, many years. I guess, yeah, since college. I'm not that old, but I feel old when I talk about how many years that was. I love to show this picture because here we have Einstein in the back, and you can't even really tell that's him. And Einstein famously graduated, he got his, degree, and he finishes, and no one wants to hire him. They call him crazy. A lot of people call him a crazy Jew to demean him, to put him down, right? No one wants to hire him. As a favor, he gets a job in the patent examiner's office. And he is looking at machines that could be used to synchronize clocks. He is literally thinking about time every day and synchronizing clocks. If you think about it, when he was doing this work, we could have a clock that maybe is 10 minutes different from someone in London, right? Or if you have a train that's running from France to Germany, or different clocks, right? It's kind of a mess. We all know to be here tonight at the same time because our clocks are synchronized. So this is what Einstein was working on. And when I showed up to my very first philosophy class as an undergrad, the professor walks in and she goes, "What is time?" I was like, oh my God, right? Hours, seconds. And she says, "No, time is entirely made up. It's a convention we have come to agree on, but there's no such thing as 7 o'clock, right, on the moon." And so that's what really got me down this rabbit hole of what is time? And this is what Einstein is spending every day on. What is time? And he ultimately comes to the conclusion, I'm going to butcher this, I always forget it when I'm standing up here, but he has this famous phrase where he says, physicists like us know there's really no difference between the past, the present, and the future.
Yeah, you have it in here. There's no difference between the past, the present, and the future.
I got it right.
Because they're all happening at the same time.
Yes, I got it right. Thank you. Yes, and she is good. You knew. Thank you. So this notion, right, that time is relative, malleable, not real, really put me on this notion that I could write a time travel story based on general relativity, right? Like I could use Einstein. So that's sort of a small piece of what you see in the book. This idea that time is relative, and our time here on Earth, right? What are we going to use it for? With our family, with our mothers, with our grandmothers. That is what we talk about a lot in the book. So another big piece of the book that I love to talk about is the book opens, this is not a spoiler, the very, very first scene, Anna time travels to the top of Mount Aragon, to this cosmic ray station. And I kind of figured, so then I set all of her, sort of her lab, everything she did was up on Mount Aragon. And people love to know how I got to that. This is a real place. This actually exists. This is a cosmic ray station on top of Mount Aragon. It was the Soviet Union. The Soviets built it. It is now Armenia. And her lab is the top of one of these towers. They kind of look like tree houses to me. But I didn't even make this stuff up, right? I mean, I made up the characters and I make up the time machine, but almost everything else in there is pretty real. And I just, every time I see this, I can't even believe, yeah, this exists. They're up there measuring cosmic rays all the time, and the computers are from the 80s and they're still using them. So another element of the book, so we have 3 generations. We have Anna, who is the main engineer who is working on the time machine. She has a daughter, Molly. And this is the middle generation, and Marjan mentioned quickly sort of the comic books, right? So she is not interested in science at all. She is interested in comic books. Why comic books? So I'm very inspired by Trina Robbins, who was a comic book artist about the time that Molly in the book. And she was really into the feminist notion of women coming out of the refrigerator. So up until this point, right, in Green Lantern or all these other famous comic books, women were literally thrown into refrigerators. Again, I'm not making this up, right? You pick up a comic book, women are thrown into refrigerators. There's a new book that came out a few years ago called The Refrigerator Monologues, and it's women, modern women, sort of like, never again, right? No more refrigerators. Well, Trina was leading that charge. and saying women shouldn't be fighting over men, we shouldn't be jealous, let's fight ourselves. And so really pull up that feminist moment in the book through Molly and through comic books. So you'll read about her in the book. Oh yeah, and so this, after you put the book to bed and before you actually sort of publish, there's this 6-month lag, right? Where you're sitting there and you're not really sure what's gonna happen. And so I used that. I found 2 women who are contemporary artists who actually drew the comics that I envisioned and imagined in the book. So there are 2 stages to Molly's comics. They're the ones that she draws when she's younger. So these are not in the book. This is post, right? I described them. And this is actually what she came up with, what my characters look like according to my descriptions. So this was really cool. So the 3 main characters are, right, Mighty Minerva, Rocket Raisa, and Atomic Anna. And they use the comic books to communicate through the time machine. They drop it off as they go. So, and then these are the comics from when they're older. And you'll see there's some love interests. Molly falls in love, right? You see the men start to come in. This was just a really fun project. And then it culminated with these were the comic book covers that came out of it. So Angela Wu and Emily Ree up here were the amazing, amazing artists that worked on these with me. And it was just for fun, and then sort of went up on social media, and it's been a really fun project. And then the 3rd generation that I'm going to talk about, and then I'll wrap it up, is Raisa. So she is the youngest. She is born and raised in Philadelphia by adoptive grandparents. And this is the Philadelphia that she would have been in. So you see in Northeast Philly, Little Russia. These are the flea markets that we talk about. This is the butcher shop where she lives and works. And down here, again, this is actually a picture from Cantor's in LA. Chaim is one of my favorite bands. This is actually their cover, their album cover, but this is what it would have looked like if you were there. So I like to show that too, because this would be Raisa and Daniel's world, which takes up the last 1/3 of the book. So that's it for now. That's the quick presentation.
That was amazing, Rachel. And it's so nice to see the images that, you know, up until now, those of us who've read the book have conjured up in our heads. This book is rich with so many different layers. There's the time travel, and you explained so well your obsession with time. And I love that concept where, I mean, I'm so curious as just the author, how you layered the different versions of reality. Did you write the draft sort of quote unquote chronologically, or did you go back and constantly change? Because we see Anna, we see Atomic Anna, we see Anna the nuclear scientist, and Molly constantly travel back to certain years of their lives and have a slightly different experience. So how did you just write that?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I wish I just wrote it. It was many, many, many drafts. And I have a very detailed spreadsheet. But you know, sometimes I'm sure this happens with you too, right? Sometimes you concentrate on one part of the book. So sometimes I would write straight through Anna's life, right? And then sometimes I would say, oh, but I need to go from this scene to that scene, right, to make sure they follow. Or sometimes I would organize the whole thing chronologically. And so sort of by seeing it from all different perspectives, I think it helped me bring them together. But it was it was a lot more complicated than I had first thought it would be to write time travel.
Yeah, it feels like it would be complicated, but I think what you pull off so well is you make it clear for the reader. And that's incredibly difficult to pull off. So the reader isn't necessarily confused. Yeah, and you have these great markers in each reality that alerts the reader to, you know, where we are in that kind of time continuum. So that was incredibly well done. Another thing that there's a lot of in this book is there's a lot of science, electromagnetism, gamma rays, things I can't even remember because, you know, I didn't retain the scientific term for it, but you did a ton of research. How did you do the research? Because I was like, is she a nuclear physicist? Because she seems like it.
I mean, I just love the science part. So I'm definitely not I love libraries, but I'm not the sit in the library kind of writer and just like read for a day, right? So as things come up, I read, but I read all the time. So, you know, Scientific American, National Geographic, science section of the New York Times, like I just read all the time. And I very much think about science, sort of use Einstein as a guide, right? Because he approached it again from philosophy first. What is time? Right? Why are we even measuring this? Before I can come up with a machine that can synchronize clocks, I need to know why and what it is. And I love that. I find that so inspirational because then he went out and found friends to help him, right, with the math. He didn't do any of the equations on his own. In fact, people didn't think he was all that great at the math part, right? But this notion of thinking about it, the way he would picture waves, right? Light waves, like it was just amazing. And so that is something that really helped me with the science because I never try to sit there and understand the equations.
Yeah.
Because they are, I can't. I don't understand them. But this notion of why time? What does it mean? That interests me.
Yeah, and I think for the reader, you make that apparent because Raisa, so the granddaughter, when she's a student at UPenn and she's being taught all these very difficult scientific concepts by her professor, what I loved is the way she's trained to think is to first sit down and actually envision every detail of a particular scene. I mean, it felt very writerly. What are they wearing? What's the weather like? To really sort of put yourself there in the scene. And that was a very new approach to me to science because, you know, we're used to the equation.
Yeah, no, but Einstein is famous for these thought experiments, right? And thinking about, so in the book, I go into detail, think about what you're wearing, the temperature, when Raisa's learning about, there's sort of the lightning strike problem and simultaneity, right? And I don't know if any of you are, don't spend that long on it in the book. I don't want to scare you away from it.
Yeah, don't worry, we're gonna finish the science part.
Yeah, but there, it's only a page, right, where basically he says, so you're standing there, one person, right, is on the platform, one person's in the train, who sees the lightning strike first, or when does it happen, right, simultaneity, and I'm butchering it and trying to make it short, but that's how he understood it, right? Is that lightning strike, are the two simultaneous, are they different times? And this is where you get to the idea of time being relative, depending on where you're standing, how you're perceiving it. And so that's how Raisa is also taught to think when she's at 10.
Yes, yes. Okay, one last science question.
Okay, I mean, I love this.
And we're gonna get to like the love and the healing. But what it really struck me, Anna, when you write her, she's this nuclear scientist who is in so many ways, you know, a powerful figure in the Soviet Union, despite the fact that she's a woman, they can't help but respect her because of her brilliance, her brain. And she creates so many of the discoveries that make a place like Chernobyl possible, that make the advances possible. Did you base her on anyone, or was it like your aunts, like Rachel? I could just see them, by the way. Rachel. You know, was she purely a figment of your imagination?
Yeah, she was. I'm sorry. I wish she wasn't. She's the woman I want to see, right?
Yeah.
And I write the women that I want to read. So, but yeah, strong women in science in the world. So that's what she is.
It was very refreshing to read a woman like her who, you know, so many times motherhood is so romanticized in fiction, in anything. And you explored her mixed feelings about motherhood in a very honest way, which was very refreshing to see. Okay, so I know people have said to you, this is a science fiction book, which I don't think it is at all, or time travel book. Okay, fine. I really think it's a book about healing. It truly, for me, is a book about healing, and that's because of what Rachel does at the end. And I don't want to give spoilers, though I'm supremely tempted to really talk about the last chapter, because it's the kind that gives you goosebumps and also makes you cry.
I'm so glad you got that it's about healing. Thank you.
It did.
It is.
It's about healing. And it made me think, what would any one of us do if we could go back in time and change something generationally for our family? It's not even like they changed something that happened recently. To change, I don't want to give anything away, but to change something that affected generations of this family. And how that one thing, it's like a sentence, could alter the experience of these three women, three generations of women.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the big questions in the book is, just because you can, doesn't mean you should. So if you can time travel, should you even do it? If you can build a reactor like Chernobyl, should you build it? Or an atomic bomb, should you? And the characters explore this. There's one scene in the Soviet Union where they're sitting around and Anna admits to her family, sort of her adopted family at the time, that she is thinking about time travel. And then they're like, well, you know, one says you shouldn't do it. And the other says, of course you should. You should go back and kill Hitler. And then, you know, that seems so obvious. But then the other says, but if it wasn't Hitler, maybe it would be someone else, or maybe something worse, right? What are you actually going to fix? What are you going to make worse? And then there's this notion of, if you go back in time, right? Maybe you're familiar with the butterfly effect, or this, so you cross the street, let's say, and you bump into someone, and then they drop something, so they don't cross the street at the same time. Maybe that was the moment they were going to meet their future spouse and partner. And just by bumping into someone, if you've gone back in time, you might have destroyed generations, right? Without even knowing it, because you killed off someone's great-great-grandmother because they never met. And so very, very small actions can have huge ramifications. So just because you can time travel and you think you know exactly where to go and what you want to do, doesn't mean you can actually do it, and should you? So if we could time travel, it's like the ultimate romantic dream to go back and fix everything. But who are you to decide what's right? How do you know? And then they go through, the characters are like, well, we could have a board, right? A board of people or something, or a panel of judges or whatever. And we could go back and do that. But who are they to decide who lives or dies, right? And I call it the ultimate weapon, because if you go back and you bump into that person and then you've erased an entire generation or 3 generations of people, right? A whole family, no one even knows they're missing when you come back, right? No one even knows what you did. So I sort of make it as the ultimate weapon, because I really want us asking, should we do it? We can, but should we? And think how different things might be if people were asking that now, right? Even Putin in Ukraine now, right? Should we be doing this?
Well, actually, I have a question about Putin, but before I ask it, I just want to reiterate these great ethical questions that you pose. You pose these great ethical questions throughout the novel about, if we could go back, do we not create the atomic bomb? Do we kill Hitler? You know, these big, big questions. But at the end, I think what will make people like me, you know, what made me a puddle on the floor, is that sometimes it's the tiniest thing that you would change. The tiniest thing can make all the difference. So, okay, now to Putin.
Okay.
So this weekend, President Putin said that if the territorial integrity of our country is threatened, we will without a doubt use all available means to protect Russia and our people. This is not a bluff. Now, your book came out in April of this year, and Russia invaded Ukraine in February. And it was really difficult, as one reads your brilliant novel, to not think about what's happening today, especially with the powerful weapons, the kinds of threats that are being made. How has what's been going on politically, globally, affected the journey of this book in the world?
Well, I would say that I know the timing is eerie and very sad. I think that the Russians were at Chernobyl about the same week that this book came out, and the soldiers that they sent in were not protected. They were not wearing the radiation suits that they needed to. It's going to be horrific what happened to them, what will happen to them. You know, and the integrity of current plants now, right, nuclear plants, is in question. So it is just terrifying. And I guess the one thing that I am, you know, I'm sad that I can keep asking is, right, should we be building these kinds of things, right? These power plants, or doing the, right, sort of working with science without thinking about how to just shut it down or what the real ramifications could be. So I think these conversations happen in a lot of the book groups, these sorts of, gatherings that I get to go to, where I get to ask, just because we can, doesn't mean we should. And I hope that we're thinking about that.
Yeah, it was kind of uncanny, some of the parallels, and there's no way when you wrote this book during the pandemic, you could have foreseen that stuff. But there's another motif throughout the book, which is you start the very different parts of the book with quotes from
Pirkei Avot.
Thank you, Pirkei Avot. Tell us about Pirkei Avot.
So Pirkei Avot is a very old Jewish book of ethics. It literally translates to Chapter of the Fathers. And it starts with this sort of a warning, be patient in judgment. And it asks some of the very famous questions that you might have heard, if not me, then who? If not now, then when? Why? Why am I doing this? Why am I here? And I have also been a little obsessed with this book since 1998. It's not very long. And I keep going back to it, both in the Hebrew and in the English, and looking at the translations and the commentaries, because it's asking these questions that I'm obsessed with, right? Like, who's going to stand up to Putin? And if not now, then when? How far are we going to let him go? But who's going to do it? If it's not me, who? And that's what the characters are asking throughout this book too, right? And I really put them into situations where they have to ask, if we're not going to do this now, what are we waiting for? When is it going to happen? So those lessons, those questions, there are really no answers in Pirkei Avot or the novel, but I love the questions, and so they are in there.
Yeah, and the quotes are, they're deeply spiritual. So you come off reading a particular section, and then you turn the page, and there's the Pirkei Avot quote. And a few of them made me like, oh my God, made me really stop in my tracks and rethink some of my choices. I mean, they're pretty deep.
Thank you.
Yeah. So very good selection there. Okay, so I was gonna also ask you about what draws you to write books, that we classify as historical fiction, because The Bend in the Stars is also historical fiction. We learned tonight there's no such thing as time. There's no such thing as the present, past, or the future. But in that construct, you spend a lot of time in the quote unquote past.
I love how you asked that. That was brilliant. Yes, I do. I don't know, I guess I'm just really drawn to this, this moment of, I think a lot about my grandparents sitting in a room somewhere in Russia, right? Revolution is breaking out. They're, people starving, there are all kinds of terrible things happening around them. They're Jews, they're not allowed to do anything, go anywhere, right? And they say, we're leaving everything, and we're leaving. And that moment, so many people face it today, every single day around the world. And I don't know, I'm just sort of caught on that moment. It's time. And I can't imagine what that takes, right? To know that this is the moment. And so I guess I keep going back to what I have heard in my past, right? Sort of my family talking about that moment, although they don't really talk about it in any kind of detail because they're like, it was so terrible, we just left. And so I put it in my head, I'm like, how bad was it? And you can read in newspaper now, right? So sadly, and see, I mean, even with Martha's Vineyard, right? People being flown in from Venezuela, like these horrible decisions that people have to make in these terrible positions, and how they end up being exploited or ending up in positions they don't want to be in because that's better than what they had before. And that to me is terrifying and something that I think about a lot.
Yeah, and I could definitely relate to that because I had that moment in my own life. And, it's very, very relatable. But you draw so well Little Russia in Philly. And another thing that was super refreshing is you didn't have the broad brush of the American dream being fantastic. Like Papa has mixed feelings about being here, and he has a very sort of, I would say, realistic vision of the American dream. That was super duper refreshing.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. Yeah, so, the book opens and you see Molly's, so Anna's daughter in America with adopted family, and adopted, she came from, the Soviet Union with, so they knew them, Anna knew them, and they were all very close, like family. And they're thinking that they can become perfect Americans if they build this bomb shelter, right? And they follow Life magazine. And they think that they know exactly what to do, and they're going to only buy Hires root beer and anything that's in this magazine. It's like that's what you follow, and you're American. And then that fades, that luster fades, right? As you realize actually your accent right away gives it away that you're not, the white American that a bank wants to give a loan to, or someone wants to sell their house to. And so you sort of see it, I think, throughout the book, as you're saying, like it chips away, right? And you see this, everything looks shinier from afar. And then as you get close up, the reality of what it is to live in a place where, you don't even know how to pack the right kind of lunch for your kid, right? Or how to make the right kind of cupcakes for a birthday party. And it seems like these are small things, but when you're the kid growing up with the bad cupcakes, right? That's like terrible. You're not going to come back from that.
Yeah, and you show honestly that, that's their experience in America. But even when Anna is a young woman in Berlin, she has to hide that she's Jewish. Yulia has to hide that she's Jewish. And they go to great lengths to blend in for survival. And it is the sense that you're never, ever really safe anywhere.
Yeah. I mean, they definitely feel that. I think that, you grow up having to run, even if, right, once is enough.
Mm-hmm.
Are you ever safe? And that it's always in the back of your head. And so I think that's in my characters in there.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you, I think I read somewhere that during the pandemic, you were reading the New York Times and you read about the station, right? The
Cosmic Ray Station.
The Cosmic Ray Station. And then I think in the New York Times book review, they were like, most of us would read about it and be like, okay. But Rachel Barenbaum was like, I'm going to write a book about this. And then did. In a short amount of time, compared to some of us who have a snail's pace. So you knew I would ask this. How could I not? Tell us about your writing process.
Yes, I did know this was going. So I will say that I actually started this book in 2018.
Okay,
So,
I see a little bit.
Yeah, so the Cosmic Ray Station was added on later. So that is my process very much of, whereas some people, might produce a beautiful first draft that is, very close towards something they might be able to show to other people or present. My first drafts are more like, blah, just sort of lots of words and ideas. And I will tell a story with a beginning, middle, and end, but I go back to it and add layers and add layers and add layers as I go, because I think I know where I want to go when I start. And then I don't know if you find this too, but it invariably changes.
Oh,
as
yeah.
I'm writing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming, because this is true for so many writers, there's some characters that kind of write themselves, and then there are others that are a struggle.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about that. Am I right in guessing the female characters came a little easier?
They did. So actually, I wrote, for those of you who have read the book, there's the second to last chapter takes place during the Russian Revolution. That was, and it's Anna's mother is in that scene, Xenia. That was actually the first chapter I wrote. And I thought that was going to be the beginning of the book, and I wrote like 125, 150 pages of that story. And I was just rushing to get to Chernobyl. And then I realized I was really bored. And that's when I just needed to start at Chernobyl. So sometimes that happens too,
Yeah, definitely. But what's the energy I don't want to use the word secret because that's annoying. But what's your secret, Rachel? Because you have 3 kids, you're very involved in your community, and you are doing all this great work with authors on A Mighty Blaze, and now you have your own show that recently was picked up by the Brookline Public Library.
The Howe Library in Hanover picked up my podcast. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Pretty exciting. So we had our first show with them today.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So what's the name of the podcast?
So it's called Check This Out at the Howe Library. And so our first guest was, we have a mutual friend, Jonathan Escoffrey, right? If I Survive You, debut author, also out of Grub Street. An amazing, amazing book. So I love interviewing authors. It's just a dream because A, I get to read their books early, right? And they send me copies. And B, I get to talk to all these amazing authors and make friends and just hear so many ideas because, right, the beauty of books is you go into worlds that you can't even imagine, right? Because we live in these very narrow silos, our experience is, right, very, very narrow, and to be able to expand that and see new perspectives and ideas, I love it. I can't get enough of it.
Yeah, and wouldn't you, I mean, we're in a library, but we live in a culture where so many people I know tell me I don't read. They just say, I do not read, I don't have time. And then they'll tell me how they binge watch 28 episodes of a certain Netflix show. So I'm like, oh, I see, you don't have time to read, yes.
Hopefully they'll binge yours.
Well,
I will.
yeah, that one you can all binge, okay. But what do you say? Like, how do you fit it all in? The reading, the writing?
I mean, I don't know, I wish I had a good answer. I wish I had a better way to, I mean, I love to write, you know, it's also, I think writers, I'm sure you're the same way. We just have a lot of things in our head, right? Like stories, you're walking around and, you know, you bump into someone on the street, maybe that same time crossing that street and you're like, oh, maybe I could write about that family. But what would have happened there? I don't know, just sort of things come up, right? And then it's like a moment of calm to be able to sit there and write it all down.
Yes, definitely. And in a way, it's like a way of processing all the noise.
Yeah,
of
it
the
is.
world.
It is. It's calming, right? It's this moment of let me get the story on the page. And especially I find with drafts like the first draft, when I let myself just write terrible sentences, right? Like the white clouds were puffy. I mean, not that bad, but right, you can just say, and that's sort of a note for me to come back and re-describe the clouds later. but right, to get past that to the story and let yourself go. Just write bad pages.
Absolutely. That's I think, again, I don't want to use the word secret because there are no secrets, but I do think people who finish writing their books and publish them are the ones who aren't afraid to have disgustingly horrible first drafts.
Puffy white clouds.
Yeah, that's not so bad actually. But
You
okay.
can't write it like 10 times.
No, that's a whole other thing, the whole revision. But before I open it up for some Q&A from our audience, I just have one final question for you, which is, are you working on a new project right now?
I am. So I am a scholar in residence at Brandeis right now, and working on a book there called Lady Killers. And this book is, while I was doing some research in their library earlier, I came across a couple of women living in 1880s Russia who were real life assassins working to kill the Tsar. And they were like footnotes, right? In the, in the men.
They were in the fridge.
Exactly. Little footnotes like, oh, and this very nice lady, Gacia Gelfman, ran the safe house. And then they like write 15 pages about the man who like sat and smoked in the house, right? Whereas imagine everything that Gacia did, right, to run this safe house. Or how about the woman who built the bombs, or the actual bombs that killed the Tsar in the end? That was a woman. There was a woman who tried twice to plant bombs. She failed twice, but she was planting bombs, right? And then another woman who was the mastermind, and no one's ever talked about them or, you know, sort of that women in the Russian Revolution. So that is the book that I'm working on, Lady Killers at Brandeis. But it's a tough one because I don't want to glorify bomb making, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, I do want to illuminate this aspect that the women in Russia were a huge part of the revolution, a violent part. And yet they're literally little footnotes. So it's a balance I'm working on if anyone has tips on how to write this properly.
That's amazing. That sounds really, really interesting and a book that should be written. I think you will master the balance, because I felt this Atomic Anna, being about Chernobyl, being about this nuclear scientist who's capable of making a weapon that destroys so many, but you sort of formed it in a way that at the end of the book, it's very pacifist, and I think you got that across really well.
Good, thank you. Yes,
Yes.
I do like peace.
Yes. So you didn't glorify it, but there was a lot of love between the members of the family, which was to me the core of all of it. So I'm going to open it up for Q&A from our audience. I know people are tuning in via Zoom. Maybe there are questions in the chat.
Feel free to ask about writing or anything.
You can ask about Rachel's earrings, which are incredible. They are her book.
My book cover, they're from Etsy.
They're maybe Atomic Annas.
So I'll ask something to start with, just because people So my question is, how did you go from hedge fund to writer? Because I'm sure that was a huge transition. Was writing always something you always wanted to do, and you just did hedge funding because it seemed like fun and made some money? So maybe talk a little bit about that transition.
Yeah, so I have always written books, and always during my free time on weekends. Okay, so always written books, and I was getting close to turning 40, and I had 3 books that I had written, and you have to go through this process of querying to try to get an agent, right, before you can sell it. And I've gone through it 3 times. I had like 100 rejections for each one. So when I should have been listening to earnings calls and like reading, right, reports or whatever, I'm like, what does my protagonist do next, right? So I had these 3 books, and they were going nowhere. And I just looked at myself in the mirror, and I was like, what are you doing? I had to pay off student loans, and that got me into the finance route, but it was not where my heart ever was. And I just applied to the Grub Street Novel Incubator, and they took me, and I was just like, for what became A Bend in the Stars. And I just sort of said to myself, oh, and I just said, I'm going to do it. I'm just going to do it. And I quit, I closed my fund, and it was totally crazy. And but I did. And so now I'm doing it full time, and I'm really glad, and I'm still a little scared that I did it, but I did.
Okay, so I know the book is about more than just time travel, but did you set out your rules of time travel before you wrote the book, or as you were writing, or was it something that evolved? Things like proximity issues.
Right, the rule of 2.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for reading so closely to ask about the rules of time travel. So I definitely started with rules. Any time travel has to have rules, right? Or if you watch Star Trek or Stargate or anything, there are rules, and your readers follow them. You have to follow them, because everything, right? I mean, time travel is all made up, so you have to create this universe. But they did change a few times. So yeah, and that was actually really hard, because then I had to go back, because you have to lay them out so clearly. So I'd have to go back and make sure that I followed them very clearly throughout the novel. So yeah, thanks for asking about them.
So your 2 books that are published and the one that you're working on all take place or are connected to Russia. Have you ever traveled there for research purposes? Did you get a chance to go to Chernobyl? Because I know they do have some tourism.
Yeah, I do. I actually, I think I'm a little upset by the fact that it's now a tourist attraction, and you can go, and they put you in like a radiation suit, and you can go for your 5 minutes or whatever, right? It's sick in some ways. But in any case, the answer is no, I have never been. My great aunts again are in my shoulder. We are never going. You can never go back. They did not speak Yiddish or Russian in our house. We were only allowed to speak English. or French, could learn French. I did speak French because that's like, you have arrived and you're Soviet or Russian if you speak French. And so they're like in my head, you can't go. And I need to get over it. But I have watched hundreds of hours of Soviet propaganda films and, of Pripyat, of Chernobyl, of looked through YIVO is this online Jewish encyclopedia that has gazillions of pictures of, life in the towns that I wrote about in Bend of the Stars too. So I've done a huge amount of research and talking to people who lived there, but I know I'm very torn because I've never actually set foot on the soil myself.
I have a question, but I'm a bit embarrassed to ask it, which is why I wanted to make sure there were
Don't
no
be.
other questions. I'd love to hear more about the love stories, the two comic book men that were on the screen.
You found them to be cute, huh?
I did. I will confess that I feel, the reason I feel torn is because I know it's like, it's like so much more than a love story and stuff. So I don't want to make it seem like I'm prioritizing that, which I'm not. But just because it hasn't come up.
Yeah, so thank you. Yes, so this is a book about strong women and the women dominate the whole book. And yet when we put out those comic book pictures that you saw, those two pictures of the men were like, people went crazy. I mean, they love them. So you are not alone, and love is love, right? That is life, and people want to read about it. They want to live it. They want to imagine it, right? We all do. I think I do. Right, so every generation in the book falls in love, and you see it. So Anna falls in love, once with a woman. It can't happen in the end, right? It's not allowed. But then she finds love with a man, and so you see that sort of love interest, and then you see Molly and Victor, and she also falls in love. Victor, actually, you asked before the hardest character to write. Victor was very hard. Molly becomes addicted to drugs and alcohol, and she's the comic book artist, and it's very dark, and Victor introduces her to many of those choices. So that love is like a dangerous love, but there's a huge excitement quality that the readers have really, they dug into, right?
It's hard not to love Victor, and you shouldn't.
Right, yes, that's exactly what I
But
hear.
he's very,
He's a bad boy, but
Yeah.
he's very seductive.
very seductive.
Yeah.
And then, just like Molly, we get seduced by him.
Yeah, and so that is a huge part, and so sometimes people want to talk a lot about Molly and Victor and that, right, drug addiction and that life of dancing, and sort of their nightlife is very active and right. And then we have at the end Raisa and Daniel, and that love starts when they're very young, and you see it sort of growing up, and it's a little more on the it does get a little graphic, but it's on the wholesome side, isn't it?
I approve of Daniel. Daniel.
Daniel, everyone loves.
This is my daughter. I'm giving her some.
Oh, that's
Daniel is A-okay.
Yes,
Highly approved.
he would be okay.
Yeah.
Going home.
Yeah, he would be.
Okay.
He would pass mom's test, not
Yeah.
Victor.
Yeah. No, not Victor.
Yeah.
Although we all want to know more about Victor.
We do.
Yeah, so the love interests are really what propels a lot of their decisions and the story and what readers have loved. Thanks for asking.
Thank you for accepting.
It is, it's the heart of almost many, many, many books, right? Love. When we love, that emotion pushes us, right, to do so many things. So I can't write a book without a love story.
And it's actually kind of very romantic, this book.
Yeah.
We didn't
Yeah.
touch upon that because we're talking about electromagnetism and all of that, but it is a very romantic book.
And it's sexy. There are sexy.
Yes, I was saying romantic.
There's romance. There's old-fashioned romance, and there's
Yes. Any questions via Zoom, Kimberly? Or okay, they're all chilling at home. Okay. Well, if there are no more questions, I would ask you all to thank Rachel. This has been really fun.
Thank you so much. It's been amazing. Amazing to be up here with you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming, and thank you to Brian from our own Maxima Books for being here with the books. And I hope you
Thank
have
you,
a
Brian.
chance, if you'd like to get your book signed, chat with Rachel, and look at her earrings up close.
I will say it is a dream come true to sign books. It really is, right? It's like,
It's better than the fund you were managing.
oh my God, yes. Yes, way better. But thank you, everybody, to the library.